My first girlfriend was part Japanese. I remember once we were at a high school assembly of hers, and in the cafeteria of this school, each one of those little white roof tile things had a design that one of the students had painted. I remember she told me she absolutely hated this one tile that resembled the flag of the rising sun, because this flag is commonly seen as primarily the military flag of the Empire of Japan, Japan's government during World War II. The same government that had tried to take over the Pacific Rim and actively fought against the United States where this school was located. She was really upset that a symbol of imperialism, crimes against humanity, the worst that her heritage had to offer, was put there flippantly with, the almost certain knowledge that the artist didn't know the context behind the symbol, just that it was aesthetically pleasing. And to a lot of people in the Japanese right wing, they are counting on many people not knowing that context. Before you continue watching, if you are interested in this topic, I do recommend watching the Knowing Better video about Japan's post-World War II history. And it goes into a lot more detail about some of the tactics and war crimes the Empire of Japan committed. I'm just going to give a super abridged version of about 79 years of history. The Empire of Japan existed from 1868 to 1947 and began with the Meiji Restoration. This saw the end of a feudal, isolationist, and decentralization of Japan during the Edo period and brought back a strong central ruler in Emperor Meiji. Now, during the Edo period, the head of government was the shogunate, and even though there had always been an emperor and a throne, think about how the UK still has a monarch even though Theresa May actually runs the country, technically. After Commodore Perry visited Japan in 1853, the Treaty of Kanagawa was signed. A lot of people in Japan were understandably livid about what they saw as the shogunate's lack of strength in protecting their own country. So the shogunate was overthrown and the emperor was given more powers. Emperor Meiji was not as isolationist as the Tokugawa family that led the shogun, particularly in military matters. Now, the term empire in Empire of Japan is pretty apt because they were quite the expansionist country. In 1910, they took control of the Korean peninsula, and in 1931, they invaded Manchuria, a region in the northeast of China. By the time World War II was in swing, Japan had a lot of control of East and Southeast Asia, dubbed from the government to the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which is probably the most Orwellian thing ever. And then after the surrender of Japan was occupied by the Allied forces, although in reality America mostly led this occupation from 1945 to 1952. When the Treaty of San Francisco was signed in 1952, the occupation was brought to an end and Japan was independent with a kinda new form of government. The period of post-occupation Japan is referred to as the post-war economic miracle by the intelligentsia at Wikipedia. Japan not only experiences great domestic growth, but would soon become a major world player. It also saw a rapid change in how the economy was structured. In 1955, it was estimated that about 40% of their population worked in agriculture. 15 years later, that number was about 17%. Even today, it's under 5%. So Japan did see quick changes moving people into industrial and service jobs. Of course, Japan also had a highly unionized labor force that let people take care of their families, but you're not going to hear Paul Ryan talk about that when he goes to the University of Chicago's Augusto Pinochet School of Freedom. And of course, the tech world also saw Japan as a major world player. Once the tech boom really hit hard in the 80s, companies like Nintendo, Sony, and JVC were among the most highly valued and innovative companies in the planet Earth. And then automobiles like Toyota, Honda, and Mitsubishi were also well known around the planet. And despite a 20-year period of loss and stagnation from 1990 to about 2010, Japan is still a major world player. It has one of the highest human development indexes in the world and the third largest GDP of any country. And there are a lot of reasons for this, but one that I don't want to undercount is the presence of American forces. Troops and military bases can mean money directly from a US government down to communities that have to stimulate local economies by buying, food and resources and, leisure. Think of how many military bases we have in the US, even though our fears of a giant Cold War invasion are long gone, and we haven't fought a war on our soil since the Civil War. Well, I guess you could count the Aleutian Islands conflict, but no you don't. And we can see these similar patterns going on in West Germany and South Korea during the Cold War. America had a vested interest in making sure that they did well. Political scientists have a word for this called Pax Americana, which refers to the fact that for a lot of the 20th century, despite the Cold War, things were quite peaceful. And that's because America had its eggs in a lot of baskets. If you have influence over two areas, they're not exactly going to fight each other. There have been similar uses in this term in Pax Britannica when the British Empire was at its height, for example. And America did not want any left-wing political parties to take hold in places where left-wing politics could grow or succumb to Soviet influence. West Germany only saw two prime ministers from their left-wing Social Democratic Party in Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt, neither of whom were willing to criticize American foreign policy even as they tried to see reconciliation with East Germany. And South Korea was basically an on-again, off-again dictatorship until 1998. Right? There's a reason South Korea is on its sixth republic right now, even though they're younger than my grandpa. Likewise, the history of Japan sees much of it being led by conservative parties. And this is where some of the ugly stuff kind of starts to surface. The dominant party in Japanese politics is the Liberal Democratic Party. And if you're an American like me, it's not either of those things, so just, try and keep up. I know I am. Yeah, this party is very much right-wing, and it has been in power almost continuously since the end of American occupation. The party was formed in 1955 as a merger between the Liberal Party and the Japanese Democratic Party, both of them right-wing conservative parties, again. And the merger was meant to provide a united front against the growing popularity of the Japanese Socialist Party. In the history of Japanese parliament since 1958, there have been 4 years where the LDP has not been in some form of majority power in the House of Representatives. Now, to be clear though, that does not mean that every single prime minister has been from the LDP party. The most notable break is Tomoichi Murayama. He belonged to the Japanese Socialist Party and he was PM from 1994 to 1996. I don't know how the Socialists got in bed with the LDP again, but times change. Now, 94 to 96 was kind of a turbulent time in Japan's modern history. They did see what some viewed as a lackluster response to the Great Hanshin earthquake, as well as the Tokyo sarin gas attacks, which shocked the entire world. And they do paint kind of a bad picture of the last major left-wing Japanese politician. But what he's most remembered for, at least among international geopol nerds like me, is the Murayama Statement. This speech marked the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II, and he issued a detailed and blanket apology for all the war crimes committed by Japan during this war. He did spend his later life working with the Asian Women's Fund, which he founded while he was Prime Minister to give compensation to former comfort women who were abused by Japanese troops during the war. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you have Prime Ministers like Nobusuke Kishi, who was Prime Minister from 57 to 1960. And the funny thing about Mr. Kishi, he's a goddamn war criminal. According to a book I could not find at my library, but Wikipedia cites a lot, so Kishi was the economic manager of Manchukuo, a Japanese puppet state encompassing much of Manchuria. And this was a really racist race science guy. He considered the Chinese to have intelligence on par with dogs, and that they were incapable of living in a lawful Japanese society, so that they needed to be ruled by brute force and under the boot of a military regime. He absolutely hated Chinese people. He abused men for their physical labor and women sexually during his time there from 1935 to 1939. During World War II, he served under the government of both wartime prime ministers Fumimaro Kono and Hideki Tojo. He was held as a prisoner after the war with the intention of being charged as a Class A war criminal, which was the most severe category of war criminal used in the International Military Tribunal for the Far East. However, as it so often is, big business comes to the rescue. Yeah, a group of influential Americans lobbied for him to be acquitted because he seemed prominent enough to be a good post-occupation leader of Japan who would be nice to American interests. Kishi was released from custody without being charged in 1948. 9 years later, he would become Prime Minister of Japan in the Liberal Democratic Party. Kishi would lay the foundation for a lot of ultranationalist Japan. Kishi did not think that the aforementioned military tribunal was legitimate, and he actively worked to rehabilitate the careers of people who had survived. He was also one of the loudest voices against Article 9, which was a part of the Japanese constitution that America had put in, stating that Japan could not preemptively declare war or have a standing military. Which seems a bit harsh, but you kind of have to realize the last time we let Japan have a military, they tried to take over the world, and that's just bad muju. Kishi and a lot of nationalists felt that the article permanently kneecapped Japan's ability to defend itself. And to this day, it's the target of many on the Japanese right. Now, it's worth noting that Japan does still have a standing armed forces in the Japanese self-defense forces. They aren't able to preemptively declare war, but they are very active. And if you've been paying attention to the politics of the region, the Japanese self-defense forces play a big part, especially in regards to North Korean aggression. Or what's perceived to be North Korean aggression anyway. But the thing about Kishi is that he was pro-American, and those people are always the good guys. He was a supporter of the 1960 Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security between the United States and Japan. This made the US and Japan military partners, giving us a capitalist partner in a region where China had been communist for a decade at this point, and it gave Japan a bit of comfort in having a strong military partner where they had three major communist countries at their edges. Kishi is both a hero of the Japanese ultranationalist and the grandfather of current Prime and Nippon Kaigi member Shinzo Abe. You can tell the familial relation. On October 12, 1960, the head of the Japanese Socialist Party, Inijiro Asanuma, was assassinated by an ultranationalist named Atoya Yamaguchi. Asanuma was a controversial figure in Japan. He was loudly anti-capitalist. He supported the Chinese Communist Party, and this was during the time of Mao, I should clarify. And he was critical of the United States. But he was a rising political star in Japan, and his ideas did catch ground with a lot of people. The man who assassinated him was a member of an Uyoku Dantai, which literally translates to right-wing group, but in context means an ultranationalist organization that is kind of culty and usually puts a lot of stickers on their cars. Yamaguchi was only 17 years old when he charged a state. Yamaguchi was 17 years old when he had charged a stage during a live political debate and ran through Asanuma with a sword. The photo taken right before the assassination is considered by some to be one of the greatest journalistic photos ever, and it did capture the sort of terror and division that was rocking the country at the time. Less than 1 month later, Yamaguchi committed suicide in his jail cell with a suicide note left that was straight out of an ultranationalist manifesto. And despite outrage from the broader public about this assassination incident, many Uyoku Dantai members saw Yamaguchi as a martyr, to the point where, upon news of his suicide, they presented gifts to the parents of this child. I want to clarify, he was 17 years old. And the country was so horrified by the example of this right-wing violence that they renounced anything of that. No, I'm just kidding. There's he has fans today, and Gavin McInnes is one of them, which is not surprising. But okay, to be fair, there aren't a lot of people at this event, but events like this are newsworthy for a reason. The ideas can permeate deep, and they do represent a fringe. But unlike screaming college students on campuses, The people who would support Yamaguchi today run a lot of Japan. Nippon Kaigi is not an Uyoku Dantai by the way the term is commonly used, but they are very nationalist, they are very large and influential. Nippon Kaigi was formed in 1997 as a merger of two different organizations. Nihon wo Mamaru Kokumin Kaigi, which composed of a lot of ex-military members, and Nihon wo Mamaru Kai, which composed of a lot of religious conservatives. The inaugural president of Nippon Kaigi was a businessman named Koichi Tsukamoto, mostly known for founding the lingerie company Wacoal. So, that's a thing. And the Nazis like to party like hell too, let's not lose track here. He was president for a year before his death in 1998. Now, Nippon Kaigi has 6 official goals which fit into the far-right trope of saying things that upon first glance seem reasonable but hide more malicious and sinister motives. Number 1, a beautiful traditional sovereignty for Japan's future. Okay, beautiful traditional sovereignty, it's not anything that the average man on the street would object to. And that's the point. As the website lists, this has more to do with respect for the Japanese monarchy as an institution in Japan. NK are monarchists, and by that nature, skeptical of democracy, and they do object to international influence, which... Number 2, a new constitution appropriate for a new era. Okay, well that sounds like a damn good idea. Japan's constitution is over 70 years old and was kind of established under unusual circumstances. You definitely could update it to be more inclusive and protective of civil rights, like, say, the South African Constitution. And the website is vague on what they want to change, but it's absolutely clear that they're salty about not being allowed to invade China anymore. As well, they do want to increase the political power of the royal family to run things. Number 3. Politics that protect the state's reputation and people's lives. This does seem to be about getting young people involved in civic engagement and support for the LDP party or other conservative outfits. And I'm sure there's a bit of wanting to crack down on the counterculture, those damn kids with their math rock bands. Number 4. Creating education that fosters a sense of Japanese identity. Now, this is probably the most malicious one on the list because it involves a big reform of the public education system. They do list legitimate problems like bullying as something they want to fix, but they do seem more concerned with moral depravity, and they want to restore patriarchal and nationalist values. They're also against gender-free education, which I assume means gender-neutral education, having schools that are co-ed, and critical views of Japanese history, which, there's kind of a lot to be critical of. Again, if any of you have seen the Knowing Better video, or maybe you just already know, Germany goes to some great lengths to educate about Nazi Germany, the war crimes committed by the government, why that fascist government was bad, how to avoid doing that in the future. It's a really good and responsible way of looking at your past with sincere desire to make sure that history never repeats itself. Japan takes the opposite approach, and they try as hard as they can to obfuscate some of the bad things that they've done in history. And NK would take that approach even further, presumably just anything that isn't completely complementary to the history gets, swept under the rug at best. Number 5, contributing to world peace by strengthening national security. Well, there's a classic line, isn't it? And everyone likes national security, everyone pays lip service to it. They talk about wanting to protect themselves from China and North Korea by building up their military, which, and it's easy to see how the national security line has led to overreach in places like the US and the UK, where we just live under constant surveillance states. And it's easy to see how someone who hasn't lived in our country can sort of view our models as some sort of standard to reach. Now, again, to be fair, it's not like I live in a place where 2 of my neighbors are active military threats. But to be even more fair, it's not like I'd pissed them off before by committing war crimes upon war crimes in their houses. Number 6. Friendship with the world tied together by a spirit of coexistence and mutual prosperity. And that's, again, also pretty benign about fostering strong international relations with allies. which to some might be in correct contract with nationalism, but cough cough Axis powers, cough cough Orban Netanyahu, cough cough. You can look up some members of Nippon Kaigi and see a lot of prominent businessmen and politicians. For example, the longest head of NK was a man named Toru Miyoshi, who was briefly Chief Justice of the Japanese Supreme Court. Incidentally, while I was waiting for this to go get recorded, the Supreme Court of Japan upheld a ruling that trans people need to be sterilized before they can change their gender, which a lot of places do, and to be fair, the ruling did say they should revise the law, but, you know, that's the kind of people that they are. Or a lot of Supreme Courts are. Maybe I should do a video about that. But the most prominent member of NK is the current Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. His brother, Nubo Kishi, is also a member, and is, funnily enough, also in the Diet as an LDP MP, but is not in any leadership roles. Kind of like a racist version of the Miliband's. Abe has been a member of the Diet since 1993, serving in the Yamaguchi Prefecture. I hope that's a coincidence. And he's been the PM from 06 to 07 and from 2012 to today. And by all accounts, he is just as despicable as a lot of the ultranationalists that you see promoting Otoya Yamaguchi's anniversary. He has been open to revising some of the previous apologies for Japanese war crimes, like the aforementioned Murayama statement, as well as questioning the existence of comfort women. Again, these were women the Japanese military forced into sexual slavery during the Empire of Japan period. This lasted way more than World War II. And even in what would be unrelated scandals, it's clear what kind of a toxic mindset this man has. One scandal that rocked Japan a couple years ago involved a school organization named Moritomo Gakuen. Yeah, I got that right. In 2017, it was revealed that this organization purchased land from the Japanese government at only 14% of what it was valued, and that 2 years prior, it had made Shinzo Abe's wife Aki an honorary principal of an elementary school that they were planning to build, named Mizuho no Kuni. In addition, the school was going to be ultranationalist and be in the vein of militarized education systems that existed during the Empire of Japan period. One of this involves worship of the Japanese royal family, as well as a gratuitous love for the military. And the president of Moritomo Gakuen is a man named Yasunori Kagoike. He is the head of Osaka branch of Nippon Kaigi, which should not really be surprising. Now, the scandal did not substantially damage his image, but it does paint the view of a man who is willing to sacrifice any view of honorable or just governance in favor of achieving his vision of an ultranationalist society. Cool, never seen that before. If you know one thing about contemporary Japanese culture that does not involve the new Code Geass movie, it's that Japan has one of the biggest population shrinkages of anywhere on this earth. Japan is the second oldest country with a median age of 47.3. Now, the first oldest is Monaco with 53.1, but I'm convinced that's just a fake country Formula 1 fans invented. So it's fair to say that Japan is the oldest country with a population larger than the city of Pflugerville. And there are a few reasons why, but one of the bigger ones is that younger Japanese people aren't having kids. And this kind of Japanese celibacy thing is something that gets widely reported, and it's not entirely sure why. Now, granted, this does happen in every developed country. As countries start to develop, infant mortality goes down, life expectancy goes up, contraception becomes more available, incomes are stable, more women work outside the household. Now, this is happening in Europe and to a lesser extent America too. This is not something that is specific to Japan, but it is something that is accentuated in Japan because the young people are having less kids than that, and the old people are living a lot longer. In addition, Japan has very little outside immigration to offset the population losses. And just as I initially was writing this last month, there was a news story about old houses in Japan abandoned by younger people moving to the Tokyo area. And the government was offering them to people who will immigrate and populate some of these areas not in the biggest city. So Japan does have a crisis, and this kind of crisis can lead disaffected young people to turn to more radical political philosophies. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the young people are going to go full NK. I mean, for one, NK and other Uyoko Dantai organizations are monarchist by nature, and they encourage obedience and deference to authority or older figures. And, say what you will about, the alt-right in the West, they aren't necessarily deferential to authority by nature. They mostly accuse them of being pedophiles. And with the state of the world, there is a big generational dissatisfaction with authority. That's not to say that there's no love of strongmen or authoritarian sympathies in our generation, but it's probably a lot less than it was just 100 years ago, say. Not to mention that Shinzo Abe has been caught in quite a few scandals. The aforementioned radical school? Yeah, it turns out there was a later scandal in which his own cabinet falsified documents in order to keep Abe's name out of it. It happens sometimes. So as the de facto face of NK and the long-time Japanese PM, it does paint a not-so-positive view of this movement. There could be a fatigue going on with this party that could see other parties taking over. And there are more right-wing parties than the LDP, but not very many that are more right-wing than Abe's faction of the LDP. His approval ratings have been turbulent in recent years. A recent poll put his approval rating at 53%, which sounds pretty good, but it's not like this is America, where a third of the people will hate the president no matter what, or France, where everyone will hate the president no matter what. So it's possible that the far right will see this leader, the most reasonable they can get, is not the savior that they wanted, and it could depress their political turnout. But at the same time, Abe did call a snap election last year, or 2 years ago, I guess, at the height of US-North Korea tensions in order to stay PM longer. And his party actually lost some seats, but they were still the victors. So what do I know? Sometimes you just pull a Theresa May. Most opinion polls that they take show a neck-and-neck party identification between the LDP, and no party preference. So it doesn't look like the LDP would lose power soon, unless you could get all the centrists, center-right, center-left, and left-wing people into an alliance together, which would be incredibly unstable, to say the least. But the next election is in 2021, and a lot could happen in the next few years that could make the LDP brand toxic. It's happened in America before. Yeah, if you're a Japanese citizen, I don't really know what you could do to stop the tide of ultranationalism in another country. It is hard in general to affect change in places like this. Although, BDS is scaring the crap out of Americans and Israelis, so maybe it's not that hard. But yeah, the knowledge is good for when said prime minister emerges out of a giant pipe with a Mario hat, and then the internet praises him for supporting his own country's culture. Like a globalist. And I like Putin too when he was a meme, but you can't ignore all the assassinations. And we should make sure to call out when he is presented as, normal, as just the leader of another country. We are rightfully terrified of reactionaries in Brazil, Israel, Australia, but Abe is just as bad as those reactionaries, and we should work to not normalize a man who has figured out how to make his position seem common sense. And okay, that's my video, everyone. This is something I've wanted to do for a while, but I couldn't get my webcam to go, so I ended up using some birthday money to buy a cheap Chinese camcorder. It is pretty different from the past content, but this is something I'm passionate about, and doing research was a lot of fun despite all the war crimes I read. I think my next video is going to be about ultranationalism in India. I do like geopolitics in the world, but I also did want to do something about the border wall, since I actually live near the US-Mexico border. Wouldn't mind doing a measured response type video. But if you have any thoughts, feel free to comment. I would love to get some feedback on that. You can follow on social media over as what you see here. Like and subscribe if you want this content to be promoted with other left tube dweebs. I do want to get more on Twitch, so it's something. I'm pretty much addicted to Overwatch, and I have a lot of games on the PS4 I have not started playing yet. Like the new South Park game, Fractured But Whole. It looks like fun. I wouldn't mind trying that out. And yeah, okay, I think I'm good. Take care, y'all. Sources in the description to this video if you want to read up some more about the history of Japan. And alright, see y'all.